What follows Sabotage is an interesting character by the name of Jakob Frank, or Jacob Frank, born Jakub Leibovich. And he takes Sabotage's attempt and perfects it. Jacob Frank who lives in Frankfurt, Germany at the time, will come together with a fellow named Adam Weishaupt, the founder of the Illuminati, as well as a fledgling banker by the name of Amschel Meyer, whose symbol is a red hexagram. A Sabbatean family actually even put it outside their business to tell other Sabbateans, we're Sabbatean, here's the hexagram, and changes his name to refer to that red sign or red shield, and the family becomes known as Rothschild or Rothschild. And then all the way, and he perfects the Sabbatean doctrine by saying, not only are you permitted to break all of the laws of Moses, you're obligated to break every commandment in the Hebrew Scripture. If it says do not steal, you're obligated at least at some point to steal. If it says do not kill, you're obligated to kill. Adultery likewise. Bestiality likewise. If it says don't offer your children to Molech, you offer your children to Molech. And so child sacrifice became embedded in the Sabbatean Frankist movement. Now, Jacob Frank claimed to be the reincarnation of Sabotage Zevi. He also, this is a strange doctrine of Kabbalah, that they actually do believe in reincarnation, and you can be the reincarnation of more than one person at one time. And so Jacob Frank actually said of himself to be the reincarnation of the patriarch Jacob, renamed Israel by God, as well as Sabotage Zevi. And so he perfects this nature of Antichrist. Modern times, there are other rabbis or there are other messiahs that are being proclaimed. And it's not unimportant to our narrative, because one such is Rabbi Schneerson, Menachem Schneerson, of the Lubavitcher movement, known popularly as Chabad. Now, why is that important? Well, we'll see. I'll show you some pictures, and when we get there, we'll discuss that. Rabbi Schneerson died in 94, but there are those in his movement that still visit his grave and say that he will be resurrected, that he is, in fact, the Messiah. And those include the son-in-law and daughter of President Trump, who visit his grave and belong to Chabad. So those influences are not trivial. And I'll show you pictures of every president since Reagan with the Chabad rabbis signing a resolution that proclaims the basis of Western civilization to be something called the Noahide laws. And we'll discuss that in detail in just a minute. So in the nature of Antichrist, the idea of yet a third temple and a return to a sacrificial system is clearly a substitute for the temple of God that came in the flesh and the temple that is his body. And we're told the church is his body. You yourselves are the temple of God. So a return to a third physical temple, which may have already happened in the historical events of the Bar Kokhba rebellion, but even the idea of replacing the temple that is Christ with some sort of physical temple is an antichrist notion. And the Noahide laws. We need to discuss those in detail, because in the Talmud and in the Kabbalah, there are laws that are said to have been given to Noah, not Moses, and thus are applicable to all of mankind. And I would recommend that you go to the Chabad website and read what they have to say about the Noahide laws. But read the fine print, because what you will read are 6 or so laws that they say are applicable to Gentiles, and every president since Ronald Reagan has signed a resolution saying the same thing, that these laws are applicable to all people on earth and are the basis for civilization. And they all sound pretty good until you read the relevant passages in the Talmud where the rabbis explain that Christians don't, if they hold to a belief in Jesus, can't qualify for any of them, and the penalty is death. And not the stoning death that's given to Hebrews, but decapitation. And this is really explicit in some of the writings of 13th century prominent rabbi that they call that's called by the the nickname of Rambam. So it's very important to see the evolution of the nature of Antichrist. What started with the replacement of a son of David, an elevation of the wrong son of David to the wrong position, and his devolution into idolatry and mysticism. And the heritage that began has now been perfected in the evil of a Sabbatean system that represents that is the representative of evil in our modern times, and the thing that we need to identify as the influence and spirit of Antichrist. And again, we'll discuss that as we go. Here's Ronald Reagan with the rabbis from Chabad. And at that time, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson was alive and was proclaimed by these people standing here to be the Messiah. And Ronald Reagan signs there a resolution, presidential resolution, affirming the Noahide laws. There's George Herbert Walker signing the same thing. There's W signing the same thing. Obama signed it. Here's President Trump. Now, I saw the interview, the video of the interview that this is taken from. And President Trump is a self-proclaimed Kabbalist. There are those that think and say publicly that they believe he is a convert to Judaism. What you see on his wall here, these plaques, are awards given to him by Chabad, mislabeled Orthodox Judaism. And what this is, at this point in the interview that this is a snapshot of, this is in Trump Tower, the then presidential candidate gets up and says, "Now this is what I'm most proud of." That's what he's saying right here, while holding up what could be argued to be a Masonic sign or a Kabbalistic sign of 666. I think I don't know about that. Some people say that. I know that is used as an occultic sign. Whether that's what he intends when he does that, I don't have a clue. However, what he is saying here is, this is what I'm most proud of. In fact, this is what you could say, this is what I'm all about. And what he's pointing to is the Kabbalah Tree of Life award from Chabad. And in one of his autobiographies, he makes reference to his Kabbalah teacher and lessons learned. So this influence is not trivial. It goes to the most prominent halls of power, and it is enshrined in the documents of our nation. It's not a trivial portion of what I will describe as the spirit of Antichrist. It goes beyond this nation. There's Chabad meeting with Putin. In fact, the Lubavitcher movement came out of the former Russia and Ukraine. And here is meeting with a past pope, affirming the Noahide laws, is the vicar of Christ. The term that the Pope used, the papacy is used for itself when translated from Latin into Greek. In Latin, they proclaim themselves to be the Vicarius Christi, the vicar of Christ, the representative of Christ. In Greek, that translates directly into Antichristo, Antichrist. So, in this nature of Antichrist, we can see these influences in the Hebrew roots movement, in the reappearance of legalism, Mosaic legalism imposed on Christians, and we can make a case for that representing the great falling away described in 2 Thessalonians, 2nd chapter. So, in this description of the nature of Antichrist, is there another man of sin to be revealed? Perhaps. Bar Kokhba was the son of perdition that Paul refers to and Jesus refers to. However, there's a pattern described, and we see other men of sin emerge through history with great effect. Kabbalistic Judaism is, in fact, predicting two Messiahs, so-called Messiah ben Joseph, or Moshiach ben Joseph, son of Joseph, and Moshiach, son ben David, or son of David. This is interesting that the Kabbalists have picked this out of an interpretation of the Old Testament, that it speaks toward a Messiah that is both the son of Joseph and the son of David. And we have two genealogies in the New Testament, don't we? We have one that is the genealogy of Joseph and results in Jesus, as it were, the son of Joseph. That comes through Solomon, the Antichrist line. Then we have a genealogy in Luke, which is the genealogy of Mary, which ends with Mary's father. And it's a line of David, not through Solomon, but through the appropriate choice, the appropriate son of Bathsheba to be king of Israel, which was named Nathan. And so we see two genealogies. We see a Ben Joseph and we see a Ben David in the New Testament. And now the Kabbalists are talking. And interestingly enough, in some of the Kabbalistic writings, and this is their own terms, this is not something from a critic of Kabbalah, but they refer to the Moshiach ben Joseph as a kosher serpent, and then the Messiah ben David, or Moshiach ben David, as the kosher pig. And there are books by those titles. And we see some interesting self-fulfilling prophecy. So there have been prophecies surrounding Kabbalah from the time of Rabbi Akiva and Bar Kokhba, all the way to modern times, and a rabbi by the name of Yitzhak Kaduri. Now, Yitzhak Kaduri got a lot of press in Christian circles because before his death at, I think, 106 years old or older, it's well over 100 years old. Before he died, he said that it had been revealed to him the name of the Messiah, and he put it in a cryptic acrostic formula and sealed it up in an envelope, stuck it in a hole in the wall, said, "You're not to reveal this name until a year after my death." And his followers, representatives of his followers, a year later pull it out, open it, and in an acrostic form it spells out Yahashua, or Jesus. And that circulated widely in Christian circles, and it gave Rabbi Kaduri, a type of legitimacy in evangelical Christian circles, but he is a prominent Kabbalist, and some of the prophecies that he made concerning the revelation of the Moshiach ben Joseph and the Moshiach ben David have been sort of self-fulfilled very publicly. And we'll talk about a couple of those since we're still on the subject of the nature of Antichrist. It's hard to see. I couldn't find any really good pictures of here, but this is the Western Wall. So what's called the Western Wall of Herod's temple in Jerusalem, also known as the Wailing Wall. And what you see there is a serpent, a snake. It was unclear, it was not a poisonous snake, and it's unclear whether that species of snake is even native to the Middle East, but it's there, it's in the Wailing Wall, and it caused quite a stir in Jerusalem, because this was one of the messianic prophecies of the Kabbalah, the serpent being the symbol of the Messiah. And you remember that tree of life image that I showed with the two serpents and then the feathered serpent that emerges from the abyss featured prominently. These are prominent messianic symbols to Kabbalists. So this one appeared in the Wailing Wall and caused quite a stir. Here's a guy taking his pet snake back home, I guess. Did it have any real prophetic significance? No. Here's another one, a picture that was widely circulated in Jewish circles. It's said of Rabbi Akiva that he, and in the narrative of the Talmud, it pairs him with three other rabbis. And so they go to the ruins of the temple in Jerusalem and they see foxes, in keeping with Jeremiah's prophecy. And the three rabbis begin to weep, and Rabbi Akiva is said to have laughed. And he said, because the foxes were there. They said, the temple is in ruins. Wild animals are roaming in the temple. He said, yeah, but if that prophecy was true, then the prophecies about our restoration are true. And so this doesn't look like a wild fox to me, and especially as much traffic, and foxes are really very shy animals, as much traffic as the Western Wall gets. This looks like a staged photo op, but it's meant to increase the messianic fervor of Kabbalists in the Middle East. At this point, we will take a break. Welcome back to our lectures on the apocalypse. The discussion at this point was the Kabbalistic prophecy of Rabbi Isaac Kaduri of Israel, that the Messiah would come, the expected Kabbalistic Messiah would come when Israel was unable to form a government. And I don't know how many people remember the recent news where Rivlin and Netanyahu were at a stalemate, and Israel was without a consensus government for some number of months. Now, this is not the fulfillment of biblical prophecy, as we pointed out, but I didn't know if you could see the slide. It's not a fulfillment of biblical prophecy. This is a prophecy of Kabbalah. And I'm not sure that this didn't represent some type of self-fulfilling prophecy, or even just a stunt coinciding with the picture of the fox and the arrival of the serpent in the Wailing Wall. There was a great deal of Kabbalistic messianic fervor at the time, which has since declined a bit, curiously. So we'll go back to our next topic. We had just begun to talk about the tools by which to interpret the text. And this is the last point on that before we get to the text itself. And there are a number of words that have more than one possible translation that are extraordinarily important to an understanding of the apocalypse. The first is the Greek geos, and often when you see judgments poured out on the earth, and the term the earth is used in English translations. It's almost always more appropriately translated the land, as in the land of Israel. Land, the Greek geos is land as opposed to sea, or as in a specific land. And in our Hebraeocentric reading, where appropriate, where there exists a land of Israel, we will translate geos in its variants, the land rather than the earth. In English, to an English speaker, the earth implies another Greek word for the whole of the inhabited globe, and that would be oikumene, which is the next bullet point, the inhabited world. So when we see geos in the apocalypse, we will render it where contextually appropriate as the land of Israel. And then when we see thalassa in Greek, it's the sea, and modern commentators on eschatology have tended to see the judgments, especially the bowls of the wrath of God, as affecting the entire inhabited world and thus the entirety of the water bodies of the world. Well, thalassa, similar to geos in Greek, is used similarly in the context of translating this word is everything. So when it speaks of thalassa, or the sea, it doesn't mean all the water bodies of the world, all the oceans of the world. It's used to describe a particular sea, such as the Mediterranean Sea or the Sea of Galilee. And so likewise, we will, in its context with our Hebraeocentric reading of the apocalypse, we will translate that as a specific sea of some kind, unless the context demands otherwise. Also, understanding the word Harmageddon, or Harmageddon. This is a Hebrew word that is transliterated into Greek for the purposes of writing down John's vision. But Har in Hebrew is a mountain. People talk about the Battle of Armageddon. Well, as we'll see, Harmageddon is the mountain to which the kings of the earth gather to war against the Lamb. All of that language argues against a literal reading. And we'll get to that when we get to that portion of the text. It has nothing to do with the plain of Megiddo. It has nothing to do with the plain of anything. It is a mountain of meeting. Magadan and Megiddo, to an English speaker, sound similar, but they really have little or nothing to do with each other. So the mountain of meeting, M-E-E-T-I-N-G, is the appropriate rendering for Armageddon, not the plain of Megiddo, and not a mound of Megiddo, but a mountain of meeting. So that goes a long way to interpreting the events that are described in the narrative of the bowls of God's wrath. And then apocalypsis we covered really from the very beginning. We understand that an apocalypse is not a cataclysmic time in Earth's history or the end of the world. An apocalypse is an unveiling, a revealing, an uncovering, as if you draw a curtain to reveal what's standing behind it. So this entirety of John's vision is entitled the apocalypse, the uncovering, the revealing, the unveiling of Jesus Christ in a vision given to John on Patmos. And so when we understand, we clear up some of the confusion caused by common modern use of some of the language and some of the unfortunate translation that we see that implies a worldwide context for the book of the Revelation. In our Hebraeocentric reading, those words that we just covered demand a different translation. And so when the words are seen in that light, the understanding of the text will be a lot clearer. A couple of notes before we get into the text. In this series of lectures, I will not say much about the dating of this book of the Bible. Preterists tend to favor an early date, around the mid-60s AD. Futurists and other textual scholars favor a later date in the mid-90s AD. In either of those cases, in my reading that we will review, there's a point at which the text transposes to a time in John's vision where he is seeing an apocalyptic vision events that are in his past and events that will soon be in his future and other events that will be in his remote future. Things that are and things that soon will be. The events will be initiated very quickly. And if it's 65 AD that he receives this vision, the fall of Jerusalem is still in his future. If it falls in 95 AD, the fall of Jerusalem is in his past, but the desolation of the nation still remains in his future in 135 AD. So it doesn't, the date of his receiving this vision matters very little to our Hebraeocentric interpretation of the text. And so I'm not going to take an opinion, except just to tell you I do favor the later date. So that is my opinion. I did take a stand, but that's not a firm stand. And I'm not a textual critic or one that can firsthand argue either date. So the same with a historicist interpretation which is only partial here, where I identify events that I think clearly reside in our past. There is also a point in the narrative of the apocalypse where it transitions from our past to our futures. And so it does the same thing from John's perspective. It will do the same thing from our perspective. So now we arrive at the text. And we will be examining the text line by line from first chapter, first verse. But my emphasis will fall squarely on the narrative of chapters 4 through 22. There's a great deal that in the first chapters I think has been written on and understood far more cogently than the text that follows the first 3 chapters. The letters to the church, the introduction seems pretty straightforward. The letters to the churches carry the weight of a great deal of substance in understanding the nature of the church, both the specific 7 churches mentioned by John, as well as the church ages, as well as the state currently of the church. I don't think that those things help us identify so much the specific events that reside in our future, but they do help us understand the nature of the tribulation that the world faces and has always faced in the examples of those 7 churches. And it's interesting that the paradigm of sevens is repeated so often in the apocalypse. 7 churches, the 7 seals, the 7 trumpets, the 7 bowls of his wrath, the 7 heads of the scarlet beast, and the 7 heads of the beast from the sea. There are a number of 7. The idea of 7 is very repetitive. There are very good comments on that exist, and I have nothing original to really offer on that until we get to the 3rd great sign, great and marvelous sign in heaven, at which time we will explore the possibility of another 7 that is implied. All right, now there are items in chapters 1 through 3 that are important to understand so that we get a flavor for the storyline and the timeline of the narrative 4 through 22. And I will go through a few things that are of special interest to me in the first 3 chapters, but our study there will be limited somewhat. Chapter 1. Now, I don't intend to read the text aloud for the purposes of this lecture. I'm going to assume that you are reading along in the appropriate text or are familiar enough with it so that you know which verses I'm alluding to. So we begin in chapter 1 with these words: the apocalypse, the unveiling of Jesus Christ, which God gave John, him, to show to his bondservants what things will, by necessity, take place quickly. Some of these events are going to take place quickly. And whether the date of this prophecy is 65 AD or whether it is 95 AD matters very little to reveal the truth of that statement. It says, so they will begin by necessity very quickly, and the events of this prophecy, this is my comment, the events of this prophecy will begin quickly and continue until the end of this heaven and earth. And so what follows is the blessing to those who hear the words of this prophecy. As we get to the close of this prophecy, we will see there's also a curse for those who add to or take away from it. And that certainly was in the front of my mind in the entirety of this study. What follows there is a doxology, a reference to the 7 spirits, and we'll see further representation of the 7-fold Spirit of God, as well as a reference to the protokatos, the firstborn from the grave. I will go into more detail about the 7 spirits or the 7-fold spirits of God when we get to the scene of the throne room. The protokatos is an important term because there are a limited number of places where Christ is referred to as the firstborn. And I think it's important to us from an understanding of the revelation, but also just theologically important to understand, to our understanding of what the tribulation is, what the Great Tribulation is. In current times, many people are confused that the Great Tribulation coming upon this world is 7 years long and is at the end time. When John uses the word thlipsis or tribulation, and in this first chapter, it refers to himself as a co-worker, as a fellow believer in this, or partaker in this great tribulation. Now, if the Great Tribulation is 7 years long, it started, and that's what John is describing in this apocalypse, then he would have to have considered himself within that period of time. And that's a very powerful demonstrator that the Great Tribulation of which John writes embroiled the world during John's lifetime. And certainly if you read much about the life of John, he certainly experienced that great tribulation that Jesus told his disciples that they would experience in this life. The word thlipsis is the one that Jesus uses. He says, in this world you will have tribulation, but do not fear. I have overcome the world. So the tribulation is something that was so important and formative that it actually was transformative for our Creator himself, as implied by this term protokatos. If you remember in Jesus' conversation with Nicodemus in the 3rd chapter of John, he refers to himself as the monogenes, as the only begotten, the only one of its kind. Well, as of his speaking with Nicodemus, that was true. But the writer of Hebrews tells us in two places that Jesus learned obedience and was perfected through the things he suffered. So the suffering, the tribulation, the thlipsis is an important formative process by which we, the sons of Adam, become the sons of God. It's meant to transform us. It's meant to try us and to change us and for us to learn to become, to transform into sons and daughters of God after the pattern of Christ. And it was such an important process that the creator of this universe participated in it and was changed from the monogenes, or the only begotten, to the protokatos. And it's used in three contexts. In Romans, it's the firstborn of many brothers and sisters, of which that we represent. And in Revelation here, it's the firstborn from the grave, firstborn over all creation. And so those are the three contexts: firstborn over all creation, firstborn of many brothers and sisters, and the firstborn from the grave are the three senses in which Christ is transformed from the only begotten to the firstborn of many. So then in this first chapter, it has this expression, look, he is coming with the clouds. And we must recognize that this is the imagery from the 7th chapter of Daniel, of the Son of Man coming in the clouds to the throne of the Ancient of Days, to the throne of God. In an ancient Near East context, the implications are that this is the deity, the supreme deity coming in judgment, the rider of the clouds, the controller of the lightning and the thunder. It always has the context of judgment and some sort of violence. So when Jesus comes in the clouds and at his ascension, they said he will come back like you have seen him go in the clouds. The implications to any reader in the ancient Near East, and if we're going to adopt that Hebraeocentric interpretation, we should think in that mindset. The implications when the Son of Man is described as coming in the clouds, he's coming in judgment. And so here in the very first chapter, this image of Christ as that rider of the clouds is set forward, and then we will see that again in the 14th chapter in a time that obviously implies great violence and judgment. And so then in the latter part of the chapter, again, you can read this yourself, Jesus reveals a mystery and gives a message. In chapter 2, we have the letters of the churches, and each of the letters involves praise, rebuke, and a promise to the overcomer. And this paradigm of the reward of the overcomer also establishes that each believer is involved in a great tribulation, which is this life, and the reward comes to the one who overcomes that great tribulation. And without anything to overcome, one obviously can't be an overcomer. But all of the promises given to these churches are given to an overcomer, a victor, someone who has victory over the tribulation of this life. And so I do want to go to rather than expound extensively, just to kind of go over a little bit the rewards that are offered to the overcomers in the letters to each of the 7 churches. The first letter to Ephesus, to he who overcomes, I will give the right to eat from the tree of life. Not the Kabbalah tree of life, but the actual tree of life. The intended food for man from the beginning. And we also begin to see this imagery of Eden begin to enter the narrative of the Revelation, the idea that we are separated from Eden, and in the end we see the trees with many different types of fruit and the reestablishment of the garden of God. That isn't interesting because in essence the right to eat from the tree of life, which resides in the paradise, a paradiso of God. We talk so much about going to heaven, and we're told a lot about the nature of the kingdom of heaven. We're told that we will be where Christ is, but there's very little in Scripture to say that we go to heaven when we die. And we all know what we mean by that, but there's very little specific language in Scripture to sort of back up our common idea of it. There are 3 occasions where those heavenly spaces are described as a paradise or as a paradiso in Greek, which always describes a garden and then brings us back to our imagery of Eden lost and Eden restored. The first is when Jesus tells the thief on the cross, "Today you will be with me in paradiso," in the garden of God. The Apostle Paul says, "I knew a man, whether in the body or not, who went to the 3rd heaven, and there he saw the paradise of God," the paradiso. And then we hear the only 3 references to that paradise, and this is promised as the reward to the overcomer in the letter in the church to Ephesus, in the letter to the church at Ephesus. Now, the letter at Smyrna, the promise is no harm from the second death. And at this point, the reader may have some common knowledge to know what a second death is. It is spelled out in the latter chapters of our text. And so it's established here at the beginning. We will see it emerge at the end of the narrative that there's a first death which has little or no consequence to the believer. The only death that the believer should fear is the second one. And we will sort that out as we get to the closing chapters of Revelation, that for the believer who is in Christ, there is no fear of hurt from that second death. Or to Pergamon, this is an interesting aspect of this reward to the overcomer at Pergamon. It says, "I will give some of the hidden manna and a white stone with a new name written on it." Now, unless we look at the specifics of the language there, we don't really understand what he's talking about. I can't claim that I entirely understand what he's talking about with hidden manna unless it implies some aspect of Christ that remains concealed, that will be revealed. Because Christ is, of course, the bread from heaven, and the manna is a type of Christ. And so hidden manna is an interesting reward. And a white stone, and it's a very specific word for stone used in Greek, the word saphon, where a small pebble is used to vote. And typically in a yes or no vote, you would possess a white stone and a black saphon. And an affirmative vote, a negative vote is to drop the black stone into the jar. An affirmative vote is to drop the white stone into the jar, and then the numbers are tallied for a vote. And so a saphon is a voting stone. It's a ballot. And here it's told that to the overcomer is given a white stone, a white voting stone. And it has a new name written on it. And I've grew up singing the bouncy hymn, "I have a new name written down in glory. There's a new name written down in glory, and it's mine. Yes, it's mine." Well, the new name, we'll see that new name referred to later in the narrative, and it belongs to Christ. And so what we have is an affirmative vote, and the name of the voter is on the stone, and it's his new name. So it seems that when it comes to our eternal reward, that there is only one vote that counts, and that's the vote of our Savior and our advocate. The accuser, we will find out in chapter 12, lost his standing in heaven. There is no heavenly court in which we must defend ourselves, because the accuser of the brethren has been cast down as of the incarnation of Christ. We have no accuser. We only have an advocate with Jesus Christ, the righteous, who is just and faithful to forgive all sin, according to John's epistle. And so it's very important to understand what that reward is. And it's to receive a positive vote from the only vote that counts. So the Saphon, the white stone, is that affirmative vote. It seems that where our election is concerned, there is only one vote that counts, and it's his. In the letter to Thyatira, we receive the morning star and authority over the nations. Now, this is very important. People consider these rewards as our heavenly reward, but here it says that we rule over the nations. And the only place that we see a description of that reigning with Christ in any type of pictographic form, there are all sorts of references through the New Testament about receiving authority with Christ and reigning with Christ. But that's a very different picture than we go to heaven, where the streets are paved with gold, etc. It implies that we are, in fact, being prepared through the process of great tribulation to be kings and priests over the nations. And, of course, that story, that what we call the millennium reign of Christ, is definitely a big part of the text in the narrative that we will review. And so we're given the morning star, again, a type of Christ. The full illumination, the hidden manna, consistent in that theme, and authority over the nations, implying the nations of the world. It's the context that that's always used for in the New Testament, which is a different picture than what is thought commonly and what is memorialized in hymn and in books. To the church at Sardis, it is given to the overcomer to be dressed in white. We're told explicitly later in our narrative that the white robes represent the righteous acts of the saints. And here it also mentions, he said, and I will never blot their name out of the book of life. Now, as a young teenager, I was about 13 years old, I was watching a very famous evangelist who would hold crusades in large stadiums. And he was preaching, and his particular brand of soteriology or idea of salvation was that once you're saved, you're always saved. Now, I believe that's true, but I also define salvation as an end result of a life lived in Christ. He was preaching along, and he says, and you will look, and your name will have been blotted out. And he stopped, and he realized the implications of the scripture he was about to quote. And he stopped in mid-word there and said, and you will look, and your name will have never been in the book of life. To be consistent with the commonly preached doctrine. And that I couldn't listen to him anymore after that. If he was willing to rewrite Scripture to be consistent with his own personal opinions, I was not interested in anything else he had to say. Now, I know there are many of you that are fans, and that's okay. He did say a lot of things, good things. He also said and did things that, if they were fully known, he might not be as universally admired. I think that there were people that came to a genuine saving knowledge of Jesus Christ through the words he spoke, but that was not the man's power. That was the power of the words. In the church to Philadelphia, the overcomer will be made a pillar in the temple of God and have Christ's new name written on them. And we'll see the rider of the horse, the white horse, at the time of the marriage supper of the Lamb has a new name written on him. So when we see the new name, even though it I think it does the message of Scripture no violence for us to believe that we will be given a new name. But the new name that John refers to in his vision, in the account of his vision, is Christ's new name, not ours. And then to the overcomer in Laodicea, he says, I'll give you the right to sit down with Christ on his throne as he sat down with, as I sat down on my throne, on my Father's throne. So here we're talking about authority over the nations. We're talking about the ruler, Christ, and having brotherhood and joint rule and being an heir to the throne that he is given by the Father. And that's a very powerful image. And although I agree with the writer that says that we don't know what we shall be, but we know we shall be like him. So this idea of tribulation carries with it great value for the believer. It is the process by which we are changed from sons of Adam to sons of God. And it's the process by which Christ himself was changed from that monogenes we described a while ago to the protokatos, the firstborn of many brothers and sisters. It's very moving to think that all of the pain and suffering of life is not an accident. It's not imposed upon us to punish us. It's imposed upon, this discipline is imposed upon us to be formative, to change us, to make us into something that is extremely valuable to our Creator. And we will see that same process of tribulation throughout the history of the world and in this narrative of the apocalypse, that the world is Eden lost, steeped in sin and violence, and is transformed through a very painful and violent process into a restored Eden and eventually an entirely new heaven and earth. So in chapter 4, we see an open door which signals to us that we're going to walk from one perspective into an earthly perspective, into another perspective that is heavenly. So here's where we leave the literal language, largely, of the first 3 chapters, and we begin to step into the apocalyptic, the revelatory and hidden language of the chapters that follow. So we see a throne. We see him who sits on the throne. A rainbow shining like emerald. That's an interesting idea, that it uses emerald. And so you instantly think, how can a rainbow be green? Well, emerald is a specific type of sapphire. And all of those stones, it's one of a number of stones that are said to be anisotropic. In other words, if you shine one wavelength of light, a single wavelength of light into that stone, what comes out are more than one. And so what you see is a number of wavelengths of light exit the stone when it's confronted with coherent, pure light. And I just imagine that the light that radiates from the throne is pure and coherent light. But that's how an emerald can be described in terms of a rainbow. One wavelength of light comes in, many come out. There are 24 elders, and here we see again the description of the sevenfold or the 7 spirits of God. There's only one place in Scripture where you see a description of a sevenfold spirit of God or 7 spirits of God. And I'll go back, because I think I put the reference on the previous slide.